The morning of February 26th, 1945. Elsdorf, Germany. Tiger Tank No. 201 from Heavy Panzer Battalion 301 rolled through the darkened village streets, its commander scanning for American armor that intelligence reported approaching from the west. The 57-ton behemoth represented everything German tank doctrine had perfected over 4 years of war. Thick armor, a devastating 88mm gun, and the psychological weight of a reputation earned through countless victories against Allied tanks. But concealed in the gathering dusk ahead sat something the Tiger crew had never encountered before, something their training manuals didn't describe, something that would fundamentally challenge every assumption German tankers held about American armored capabilities. The American tank bore the name Fireball painted on its hull, serial number 3-8, a T-26E3 heavy tank, so new that most American crews hadn't seen one either. Only 40 of these machines existed in the entire European theatre. This particular vehicle belonged to F Company, 33rd Armoured Regiment, 3rd Armoured Division. Its crew had received the tank barely a week earlier, replacing their worn Sherman with this massive 46-ton monster that dwarfed anything America had previously fielded. The loader gripped shells for a 90mm gun, twice the caliber of weapons mounted in standard Sherman tanks. The driver felt the strain of an underpowered Ford engine struggling to move the heavy vehicle through muddy German roads. The commander knew they were spearheading an assault into enemy territory with an untested weapon whose combat capabilities remained theoretical. None of them knew that within minutes they would become the first American crew to face German heavy armor in this revolutionary new tank, and that the result would reverberate through both armies' understanding of armored warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The strategic situation in February 1945 had reached its final desperate phase. Germany's once mighty armoured forces, which had terrorised Allied tank crews for years, were collapsing under relentless pressure from all directions. Soviet armies hammered eastward toward Berlin. British and Canadian forces pressed through the Netherlands. American divisions drove toward the Rhine, Germany's last natural defensive barrier. The Wehrmacht fought with the ferocity of cornered animals, knowing defeat was inevitable but determined to extract maximum cost from every yard of German soil surrendered. Tank battles raged through destroyed villages and shattered forests as German commanders threw their remaining panzers into increasingly hopeless defensive actions. For American tankers, the situation had become a grim mathematical reality. Sherman medium tanks, America's workhorse armored vehicle throughout the war, were catastrophically outmatched by German armor. The Panther medium tank's 75mm gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor from ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, while Sherman crews needed to close within dangerous proximity to have any chance of penetrating Panther armor. The Tiger heavy tank was even worse, its 88mm gun turning Shermans into burning coffins from distances that made return fire impossible. American tank commanders had developed elaborate tactics to compensate for their vehicles' inferiority: flanking maneuvers, numerical superiority, close air support, and anything to avoid direct confrontation with German heavies. But tactics couldn't overcome fundamental disparities in firepower and protection. American tankers died in burning Shermans, knowing their tanks couldn't win straight fights against German armor. The political and institutional resistance to fielding a heavy American tank represented one of the war's most consequential failures of military leadership. General Leslie McNair, commanding Army ground forces, had opposed heavy tank development throughout the war, arguing that tank destroyers, lightly armored vehicles with powerful guns, should handle enemy armor, while tanks supported infantry and exploited breakthroughs. This doctrine, elegant in theory, proved catastrophic in practice. Tank destroyers lacked armor to survive direct engagement with German tanks. Shermans, pressed into anti-tank roles they weren't designed for, suffered appalling losses. American tankers understood the problem viscerally, every day, facing Panthers and Tigers that killed them before they could return effective fire. But institutional inertia, logistical concerns about introducing new vehicles, and McNair's stubborn opposition delayed heavy tank deployment until it was almost too late. The T-26 program, which would eventually produce the Pershing, had begun, as far back as 1942, when Army Ordnance recognized that Sherman replacements would be necessary. Engineers developed successive prototypes, testing different transmission systems, suspension designs, and armaments. The T-20 experimented with automotive improvements. The T-23 introduced a 76mm gun but suffered electrical transmission problems. The T-25 incorporated the 90mm gun that would become the Pershing's primary weapon. Each iteration addressed specific shortcomings, gradually evolving toward a vehicle capable of matching German armor. But the development process dragged on for years while American tankers died in obsolete Shermans, victims of institutional failure to recognize combat realities. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 finally shattered the illusion that Shermans could handle German armor. Germany's surprise offensive in the Ardennes forest threw approximately 400 Panther tanks, along with Tiger eyes and other heavy armor, against American divisions equipped predominantly with Shermans. The results were devastating. American tank battalions suffered catastrophic losses as German armor destroyed Shermans with impunity. The 75mm guns on early Shermans couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor even at point-blank range. Upgraded 76mm guns on later Shermans could defeat Panthers under favorable conditions but remained inadequate against the thicker armor of Tiger tanks. American commanders, watching their tank units being systematically destroyed, finally demanded the heavy tanks that Ordnance had been developing for years. On December 22, 1944, while the Battle of the Bulge still raged, orders went out to deploy T-26 E-3 tanks to Europe immediately. Production had begun only the previous month at Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan. Just 10 tanks rolled off assembly lines in November, 30 more in December, 70 in January 1945. The first shipment, 20 tanks total, arrived in Antwerp in January 1945. General Omar Bradley split them between 3rd Armored Division and 9th Armored Division, units already engaged in heavy combat and desperate for weapons capable of fighting German armor on equal terms. These 20 tanks represented America's entire heavy tank combat strength in Europe, an infinitesimal fraction of the thousands of Shermans operating across multiple armies, but a revolutionary capability that would fundamentally alter tactical realities for the crews lucky enough to receive them. The Pershing, as it would be officially designated in March 1945, represented a complete departure from previous American tank design philosophy. Where Shermans emphasized reliability, ease of production, and automotive excellence at the expense of armor and firepower, the Pershing prioritized combat capability. Frontal armor reached 102 mm thickness, substantially heavier than the Sherman's 51mm glacis. The massive cast turret mounted a 90mm M3 gun, derived from an anti-aircraft weapon and possessing ballistic performance comparable to the German 88mm gun that had terrorized Allied armor for years. The tank weighed 46 tons, 10 tons heavier than a late-production Sherman, necessitating torsion bar suspension to handle the increased weight. A Ford GAF engine, essentially the same 500 horsepower unit that powered Sherman tanks, struggled to move the much heavier Pershing, resulting in sluggish acceleration and poor cross-country mobility. But for the first time, American crews would enter combat with armor thick enough to resist German guns and a weapon powerful enough to kill German heavies at respectable ranges. The 90mm M3 gun transformed American tank firepower overnight. The weapon fired a 24-pound armor-piercing projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second, generating kinetic energy sufficient to penetrate Tiger armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Standard M82 armor-piercing shells could defeat 8½ inches of armor sloped at 30 degrees from 1,000 yards range. Against the Tiger Eye's frontal armor, 100 mm thick but vertical rather than sloped, the 90mm gun was devastatingly effective. Even the Panther's formidable sloped glacis effectively immune to Sherman fire from most angles, became vulnerable to 90mm attack under favorable conditions. For German tank crews accustomed to engaging American armor with impunity from long range, the 90mm gun represented a psychological shock as profound as the technical challenge it posed. But firepower alone couldn't guarantee survival. The Pershing's armor protection, while substantial by American standards, remained inferior to German heavies. The Tiger I mounted frontal armor 100mm thick. The Panther's sloped 80mm glacis provided effective protection equivalent to 140mm of vertical armor. The Tiger II, Germany's most heavily armored tank, featured frontal protection up to 180mm thick, virtually immune to anything the Pershing could fire. German tank guns retained their lethal effectiveness. The Panther's 75mm KK-42 could penetrate Pershing frontal armor from most combat ranges. The Tiger's 88mm KVK-36 was even more dangerous, capable of defeating Pershing armor with near certainty. This created a tactical reality profoundly different from Sherman combat experience. Pershing crews could hurt German armor, but German armor could hurt them back. The days of one-sided slaughter were ending, replaced by contests where both sides faced genuine danger. The crews of those first 20 Pershings understood they were guinea pigs, testing an unproven weapon under combat conditions that would either validate years of development or reveal fatal flaws. Technical problems plagued the tanks from the beginning. The Torquematic transmission, a new design intended to handle increased weight and power, suffered teething troubles. Drivers reported difficulty with gear changes, particularly under combat stress. The electrical systems proved temperamental. Minor mechanical issues that would have been routine on Shermans became major problems on Pershings because no one had spare parts, stockpiles, or established maintenance procedures. Major General Gladion Barnes, Chief of Army Ordnance Research and Development, personally led the Zebra mission to Europe in February 1945, specifically to support the T-26E3 tanks and address technical problems as they emerged. The mission's existence acknowledged that America was essentially conducting live combat trials with a weapon still working through development issues. Training time was minimal. Crews received a few days of familiarization, learning the Pershing's controls, practicing gunnery, understanding the new tank's capabilities and limitations. But there wasn't time for the extensive training program that would normally precede combat deployment of a revolutionary new weapon. The tactical situation was too urgent, German resistance too fierce. American commanders needed heavy tanks immediately, not after months of additional preparation. So crews who had spent years in Shermans suddenly found themselves commanding vastly more powerful but less familiar vehicles, heading into combat against veteran German tankers who had been fighting in Panthers and Tigers for months or years. 3rd Armoured Division received their first Pershings in mid-February 1945 during intensive fighting around the Ruhr River. The division's advance toward Cologne, Germany's 4th largest city, required breaking through prepared German defensive positions defended by remnants of 9th Panzer Division. German commanders knew that every day of delay gave their collapsing Reich additional time to prepare defences closer to the homeland's vital centres. They committed their remaining armour without hesitation, accepting losses that would have been unthinkable earlier in the war, because the alternative, allowing American armour to advance unopposed, was worse. Panzer IV medium tanks, obsolescent but still dangerous in defensive positions, covered key intersections. Panthers provided mobile firepower, moving between threatened sectors. Tigers held critical terrain, their thick armour and powerful guns making them nearly impossible to dislodge without heavy casualties. Against this desperate but still formidable German resistance, 3rd Armoured Division deployed their precious few Pershings wherever the tactical situation was most critical. Task Force Wellborn, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Wellborn, led 1st Battalion, 33rd Armoured Regiment toward the village of Elsdorf on February 26, 1945. The force consisted primarily of Sherman medium tanks supported by mechanized infantry with Pershing No. 3 to 8 Fireball, assigned to spearhead the advance. The decision to place the untested Pershing in the vanguard reflected both confidence in the new tank's capabilities and recognition that if German heavy armor appeared, only the Pershing had any chance of defeating it. The deserted village had been prepared for defense with log roadblocks at western approaches, anti-tank guns covering likely avenues of advance, and German infantry positioned to ambush American armor, attempting to breach the defenses. As dusk fell on February 26th, Fireball reached the edge of Elsdorf and stopped at a log barricade on Steinstrasse Road near a railway crossing. The German infantry, seeing the massive American tank approach, panicked and abandoned their positions. This unexpected success encouraged Fireball's crew to attempt crossing the wooden obstacle by simply driving over it. As the Pershing slowly climbed onto the logs, tracks churning for purchase, a Sherman tank from the same task force pulled up behind, waiting to follow through the gap Fireball was creating. Then the night exploded into violence. 3 Tiger tanks from Heavy Panzer Battalion 301 had entered Elsdorf from the east, moving through the village toward its western edge, where American forces were approaching. 2 Tigers stopped halfway through the village, positioned to provide supporting fire. The third, number 201, continued to scout ahead in the darkness. The crew spotted the American armor silhouetted against the night sky. The Sherman directly behind Fireball presented a perfect target, its thin armor no protection against the Tiger's gun. An 88mm shell, source unclear whether from the Tiger or from German Panzerfaust infantry, weapons or field artillery, ripped the Sherman apart in a fireball that lit up the entire area. Suddenly, Fireball, struggling to cross the log barrier, was illuminated by the blazing Sherman directly behind it, a perfect target in the darkness. The Tiger crew saw the massive American tank clearly now, larger than any Sherman they had encountered, with a profile unlike anything in their recognition manuals. They had seconds to decide: fire immediately while the target was stationary and perfectly silhouetted, or take a moment to identify exactly what they were engaging. The commander ordered his gunner to fire. At approximately 100 yards range, point blank by tank combat standards, the Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 gun fired 3 shots in rapid succession, demonstrating the skill and training that made German tank crews among the war's finest. The first round struck Fireball's turret, penetrating through the coaxial machine gun port opening in the mantlet. The ballistic design of the mantlet, intended to deflect incoming rounds, failed catastrophically when struck directly in its weakest point. The 88mm armor-piercing shell passed through the opening and detonated inside the turret, killing the gunner and loader instantly. The second shot hit the muzzle brake at the end of Fireball's 90mm barrel. The impact, though not penetrating the gun tube itself, generated shock waves that set off the round already chambered in the breech. The resulting explosion inside the tank damaged the barrel, rendering the main gun inoperable. The third shot struck the turret side, taking off the upper cupola hatch and demonstrating that at close range, the Tiger could defeat Pershing armor with brutal efficiency. Fireball's surviving crew, commander and driver, understood immediately that their tank was mission killed. Main gun destroyed, 2 crew members dead, ammunition potentially compromised by the internal explosion. The driver reversed frantically, attempting to back away from the Tiger's line of fire before another round finished them. But the Tiger crew, having achieved 3 hits in rapid succession, faced their own crisis. Their tank had backed into debris while maneuvering, entangling the tracks and immobilizing the vehicle. The commander made the decision to abandon rather than sit helpless, waiting for American infantry to close in with explosives or flamethrowers. The Tiger crew escaped into the night, leaving their immobilized vehicle for American recovery teams to find the next morning. The first encounter between a Pershing and German heavy armor had ended ambiguously. The Pershing had been knocked out, 2 crew members killed, the tank itself requiring extensive repair. But the Tiger had also been lost, abandoned after mechanical failure rather than destroyed by enemy fire. German tankers examining the site the next morning would have noted the massive size of the American tank, its thick armor, the huge 90mm gun barrel. This wasn't a Sherman. This was something new, something that changed the tactical calculus German crews had relied upon throughout the war. American armor could no longer be engaged with impunity. The new tanks carried guns powerful enough to kill Panthers and Tigers. For the first time, German tank crews faced a weapon that made fighting American armor genuinely dangerous. 24 hours later, on February 27th, another Pershing crew got their chance for revenge. Sergeant Nicholas Mashlonik commanded Pershing No. 40, a T-26E3 assigned to the same task force that had lost Fireball the previous night. His crew had heard about the engagement, knew that Fireball had been knocked out by a Tiger, understood that German heavy armor was operating in the area. When Tigers and Panzer IVs appeared during renewed fighting around Elsdorf, Mashlonik's crew was ready. The engagement happened fast, typical of tank combat where visibility, cover, and split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. Mashlonik spotted a Tiger at approximately 900 yards range, relatively long by the close-quarters standards of European village fighting. Under normal circumstances, a Sherman crew at this range would have been in desperate trouble, their 75mm or 76mm guns barely capable of penetrating Tiger armor even if they achieved perfect hits. But Mashlonik commanded a Pershing, armed with the 90mm gun and high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition that transformed American tactical possibilities. The gunner aimed carefully, compensating for range and the movement both tanks were making through the rubbled street. He fired a single shot, using T-30E16 high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition specifically designed for penetrating heavy armor. The 90mm shell struck the Tiger's lower gun shield, one of the few areas where Tiger frontal armor was potentially vulnerable to defeat. The projectile punched through, penetrating into the fighting compartment and causing catastrophic damage to the crew and internal systems. The Tiger was destroyed so quickly that photographs taken afterward showed the penetration hole but little external damage, the kill achieved by a single well-placed shot that would have been impossible from a Sherman. This was the moment German tank crews had dreaded. An American tank had just destroyed a Tiger I in frontal engagement at 900 yards range, something no Sherman had ever accomplished without extraordinary luck or perfect positioning. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. If American tanks could now kill Tigers from the front at standoff ranges, the fundamental advantage that had kept German armor superior throughout years of fighting had just evaporated. German crews could no longer assume they would always get the first effective shot, always be able to destroy American armor before facing return fire. The battlefield had become genuinely two-sided, with both forces capable of inflicting catastrophic losses on the other. But Mashlonik's crew wasn't finished. After destroying the Tiger, they engaged two Panzer IV medium tanks, older designs from the war's early years that remained in service, because Germany's industrial collapse prevented replacing them with more modern vehicles. Against the Pershing's 90mm gun and thick armor, Panzer IVs were hopelessly outmatched. Both were quickly destroyed, bringing Mashlonik's total for the day to 3 tank kills. By the end of the war, Pershing No. 40 would achieve 4 confirmed tank kills, making it the highest-scoring Pershing of World War II. Mashlonik himself had destroyed 15 German tanks since Normandy, 3 in his Sherman, 4 in his Pershing, demonstrating both that skilled crews could succeed in any vehicle and that the Pershing gave them capabilities Shermans never could match. Fireball, despite being knocked out on February 26, wasn't permanently lost. American recovery crews salvaged the damaged tank, brought it to maintenance facilities, and began repairs. The welded turret penetration holes, replaced the destroyed gun barrel, installed new internal equipment to replace systems damaged in the ammunition detonation. Remarkably, Fireball was back in combat service by March 7th, less than 2 weeks after being knocked out, demonstrating the effectiveness of American maintenance capabilities, even for brand-new tanks with limited spare parts availability. The crew who took it back into action did so knowing what the tank could endure and survive, confidence that would prove crucial in the bitter fighting ahead. While 3rd Armoured Division's Pershings fought around Elsdorf, 9th Armoured Division's T26 E3 tanks saw action in fighting around the Ruhr River. One Pershing was disabled by 2 hits from a German 150mm field gun, massive artillery pieces normally used for indirect fire, but pressed into anti-tank rolls by desperate German defenders. The The fact that German commanders were using heavy field artillery in direct-fire anti-tank roles indicated how seriously they took the Pershing threat. Another Pershing from 9th Armoured would play a crucial role at Remagen Bridge, but those events belonged to March, when the strategic situation would reach its climax with American forces crossing the Rhine and driving into Germany's industrial heartland. The tactical lessons from these first Pershing engagements spread rapidly through both armies. American commanders, relieved to finally have a weapon that could fight German heavies on somewhat equal terms, demanded more Pershings immediately. But production constraints meant reinforcements arrived slowly. By early March, only about 20 Pershings were actually in combat, though additional tanks were arriving in Europe and being prepared for deployment. German intelligence officers, analyzing reports from tank crews who had encountered the new American heavies, faced the grim realization that their armor superiority, the advantage that had allowed outnumbered German tank forces to inflict disproportionate casualties on Allied armor, was ending. The mathematical reality of war, American numerical and industrial superiority that had always been inevitable if allowed to fully manifest, was finally expressing itself in armor, capable of backing up America's overwhelming production capacity. The German tank crews, who faced Pershings in those first weeks of March 1945, understood immediately what the new American tank represented. This wasn't just another vehicle, another minor improvement in an ongoing series of Allied tank developments. The Pershing was a fundamental shift in combat capabilities that eliminated German armor's primary advantage. Yes, Panthers and Tigers still had thicker armor. Yes, their guns could still penetrate Pershing frontal armor under many conditions. But for the first time, American tanks carried guns that could reliably kill German heavies, and armor thick enough that German crews couldn't simply destroy them with single shots from long range. Tank combat was becoming what German tactical doctrine had always feared, a mutual contest where both sides could hurt each other, decided by crew skill, tactical positioning, and numerical advantage rather than by overwhelming German technical superiority. In the freezing February rain that turned German roads to quagmires, as American armor ground eastward through destroyed villages and shattered forests, a quiet revolution was unfolding. The age of German tank dominance, 4 years of Panthers and Tigers terrorizing Allied armor, was ending not with dramatic battles, but with the appearance of 20 American tanks that proved the principle. America could build heavy armor equal to German designs. The industrial capacity that had produced 50,000 Sherman tanks could produce Pershings. The tactical doctrines that had optimized Sherman employment could adapt to Pershing capabilities. And most importantly, the crews who had endured years of fighting in inadequate Shermans, dying in flames because their tanks couldn't match German armor, finally had a weapon that gave them a chance. Fireball sat in the maintenance depot, welders sealing penetration holes, mechanics installing a replacement gun barrel, the resurrection of a tank that had been knocked out but not destroyed. Within 2 weeks it would be back in combat, its crew rolling through German streets, turret traversing to track potential targets, 90mm gun capable of killing any German tank they encountered. In workshops across the rear areas, more Pershings were being prepared for deployment. In factories back in Michigan, production was accelerating, responding to urgent demands from Europe for more of the tanks that were finally allowing American armor to fight on equal terms. But one question remained unanswered in those last weeks of February 1945. What would happen when Pershings encountered German armor not in ambushes or meeting engagements, but in the close-quarters chaos of urban combat, where American crews would face the most desperate and skilled German resistance? The answer would come in early March, in the ruins of Germany's fourth-largest city, beneath the towering spires of Cologne Cathedral, in a tank duel that would be captured on film and become one of the most famous armoured engagements of World War II. March 6, 1945. The ancient city of Cologne lay in ruins, 95% of its population evacuated, its buildings reduced to rubble by 262 Allied air raids that had pounded Germany's fourth-largest city into devastation. Yet through all the bombing, through all the destruction that had turned Cologne into a wasteland of debris and shattered masonry, One structure still stood defiantly against the carnage. The Cologne Cathedral, its twin Gothic spires rising hundreds of feet into the smoke-filled sky, had been struck repeatedly but refused to fall. The cathedral had become a symbol, to Germans of their nation's endurance, to Americans of a final objective worth capturing. 3rd Armoured Division, driving into Cologne from multiple directions, was closing in on the cathedral square, and waiting there, positioned to defend Germany's symbol with his life, was Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelborth, commander of a Panther tank from Panzer Brigade 106 Feldherrn Halle. Bartelborth was an experienced tank commander who had survived battles that killed most of his comrades. He understood that Germany had lost the war, that defending Cologne couldn't change the inevitable outcome, that he could have withdrawn his Panther across the Rhine to safety with the other retreating German units. But he had chosen to stay, positioning his tank on Marzellenstrasse with excellent fields of fire covering approaches to the cathedral. The Panther's 75mm KK-42 gun, one of the war's finest tank weapons, pointed down Komödienstrasse, ready to engage any American armor attempting to reach the square. Bartelborth's crew waited in their tank, engine idling quietly, knowing American forces were clearing the surrounding streets, understanding that combat was inevitable. Company E, 32nd Armoured Regiment, 3rd Armoured Division, was conducting methodical street-by-street clearing operations, the dangerous work of urban combat where every building might hide German infantry with Panzerfausts, every intersection might conceal anti-tank guns, every pile of rubble might screen enemy armour waiting in ambush. 2 Sherman tanks from Easy Company advanced down a street running parallel to the cathedral, supporting infantry who moved cautiously through the ruins, checking for German defenders. The lead Sherman approached a pile of debris blocking the road and stopped, the crew calling for a bulldozer to clear the obstacle. The second Sherman pulled up behind, waiting. Neither crew realized they had just entered the Panther's engagement zone, perfectly positioned in the German tank commander's sights. Bartelborth's gunner fired without hesitation. At this range, perhaps 200 meters, the Panther's gun was absolutely lethal against Sherman armor. The first 75mm shell struck the lead Sherman's turret, penetrating the armor and detonating inside the fighting compartment. The explosion killed 3 of the 5 crew members instantly, the other 2 scrambling desperately to escape the burning tank. The second Sherman's commander, seeing his companion destroyed in a single shot, understood immediately that his thin-armored tank had no chance against whatever had just fired. He ordered reverse, attempting to back away from the kill zone before the German gun traversed to engage him. But the Panther gunner was too skilled, too fast. A second round smashed into the Sherman's tracks, immobilizing it before it could retreat. The crew abandoned their disabled tank and fled on foot, leaving 2 burning Shermans blocking the street and the Panther in complete control of the approach to the cathedral. Staff Sergeant Robert Early, commanding T-26E3 Pershing, nicknamed Eagle 7 from Easy Company, heard the radio chatter reporting the engagement. 2 Shermans destroyed by what was probably a Panther tank positioned somewhere near the cathedral. American infantry pinned down, unable to advance past the burning tanks. The entire American advance in this sector had stalled, stopped by a single German tank that the Shermans couldn't defeat. Early realized his Pershing could reach the engagement area by traveling on a parallel street, approaching from a direction the German crew might not expect. He gathered his crew, driver Woody McVeigh, radio operator Homer Smokey Davis, gunner Corporal Clarence Smoyer, and loader John de Riggy, explained his plan, and began moving toward the fight. A U.S. Army Signal Corps cameraman named Sergeant Jim Bates had been following Easy Company, filming the advance through Cologne for historical documentation and training purposes. When the Shermans were knocked out, Bates positioned himself in the Deutsche Arbeitsfront building overlooking Marzellenstrasse, where he could see both the burning American tanks and the Panther waiting on the street below. He set up his camera, having no idea he was about to record one of World War II's most famous tank engagements. From his elevated position, Bates watched as Early's Pershing approached the intersection of An den Dominikanern and Marzellenstrasse, the streets perpendicular to where the Panther sat waiting. Early had scouted the position on foot, creeping through buildings to observe the German tank's location. He returned to Eagle 7 and briefed his crew on the tactical situation. The Panther sat approximately 110 meters away, its gun pointed down Komödienstrasse, away from the intersection where the Pershing would appear. If they could surprise the German crew, hit them before they could traverse their turret and return fire, the engagement would be over quickly. But if the German commander spotted them early, if the Panther got its gun on target first, even the Pershing's thick armor might not save them. The plan was simple and desperately dangerous. Drive into the intersection far enough to fire into the Panther's side armor, hit them hard and fast, and pray that speed and surprise overcame German training and experience. Eagle 7 approached the intersection slowly, McVeigh driving carefully to avoid debris that might throw a track or immobilize them in the open. As the Pershing's bow began entering the crossing, Smoyer, the gunner, acquired the Panther in his sights. The German tank sat exactly where Early had described, its long gun barrel pointing away from them, exposing the vehicle's vulnerable side armor to American fire. For a moment, it seemed the ambush would succeed perfectly, the Pershing appearing unexpectedly and destroying the Panther before the German crew could react. Then Bartelborth's survival instincts, honed through countless battles, triggered an alarm that saved his life. The Panther's turret began traversing, the gun swinging toward where the Pershing was emerging into the intersection. Bartelborth had sensed movement, perhaps heard the Pershing's engine, possibly just felt the wrong kind of tension in the silence before combat. His gunner began slewing the turret right, bringing the 75mm gun to bear on the American tank. Bates, watching from above, filmed frantically, certain he was about to see the new American tank destroyed exactly like the Shermans had been minutes earlier. The two tanks were seconds from mutual engagement, both crews knowing that the first, accurate hit would likely decide the outcome. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. But Bartelborth hesitated. In the split second when he should have ordered his gunner to fire immediately, he paused, confused by what he was seeing. The American tank emerging into his sights didn't look like a Sherman. The silhouette was wrong, the profile too large, the turret shape unfamiliar. Bartelborth had never seen a Pershing before. Only 20 existed in the entire European theatre, and they had been in combat for barely a week. German intelligence hadn't distributed recognition information to frontline units. For a crucial moment, Bartelborth wondered if the tank in his sights might be German, a friendly vehicle that his gunner was about to destroy in a catastrophic friendly fire incident. His daughter would later recount that her father had told the family before his death that he believed the approaching tank was German, that he had expected to see a Sherman, and couldn't reconcile the unexpected vehicle with his tactical assumptions. That hesitation, perhaps 2 seconds of uncertainty, cost him everything. Smoyer didn't hesitate. His gun sight showed a Panther, clearly identified by its distinctive shape, and the German cross barely visible through smoke and dust. His training took over, the hours of practice translating into smooth mechanical action. He fired while Eagle 7 was still moving into the intersection, not waiting for the tank to stop, prioritizing speed over the marginal accuracy improvement from a stable platform. The 90mm gun roared, the massive recoil rocking the 46-ton Pershing, the armor-piercing shell crossing 110 meters in a fraction of a second and slamming into the Panther's side just below the gun shield. The penetration was devastating. The 90mm shell punched through the Panther's side armor, which at 40mm thickness provided no meaningful protection against the American gun's kinetic energy. The projectile detonated inside the fighting compartment, catastrophic overpressure and shrapnel killing Bartelborth instantly and wounding other crew members. Fuel lines ruptured, ammunition began cooking off from the heat. Flames erupted inside the tank as the crew desperately tried to escape before the fire consumed them. Eagle 7 had stopped in the middle of the intersection, McVeigh halting the tank to give Smoyer a stable platform for follow-up shots. Early, watching the Panther burn, ordered Smoyer to fire again to ensure the German tank wouldn't return fire against their exposed position. Smoyer fired a second time, the shell striking the Panther's turret ring, the junction between turret and hull where armor was thinnest. The impact jammed the turret mechanism and penetrated into the fighting compartment, ensuring that even if crew members survived the first hit, the tank itself was completely destroyed. German soldiers were visible in Bates's camera footage, one with his clothing aflame, evacuating the vehicle through commanders' and loaders' hatches. 4 crew members escaped into the street, running through American machine gun fire toward any cover they could find. The gunner, positioned deeper in the turret, tried desperately to follow, but the second American shell hit just as he reached the commander's hatch. He died there, visible in the film footage, slipping back into the burning turret as flames towered from the Panther's hatches. Smoyer fired a third shot, a final insurance round to guarantee the Panther would never threaten American forces again. The 90mm shell penetrated completely through the side armor and exited the opposite side, the projectile passing entirely through the tank. Bates's camera captured it all: the 3 impacts, the crew evacuating under fire, the gunner dying in the hatch, the inferno that consumed the Panther as it burned in front of Cologne Cathedral. The engagement had lasted perhaps 30 seconds from the moment Eagle 7 entered the intersection until the German tank was completely destroyed. In those 30 seconds, the tactical realities of armoured warfare on the Western Front had fundamentally changed. German tank crews who heard reports of the Cologne Cathedral engagement understood the implications immediately. A Panther, one of Germany's finest tanks, positioned defensively with excellent fields of fire, had been destroyed in seconds by an American tank that most German crews didn't know existed. The 90mm gun had penetrated Panther side armor with contemptuous ease, demonstrating firepower that made German tanks vulnerable even when hull down or in defensive positions. The American crew had executed the engagement with skill and aggression that equaled anything German tankers could accomplish. Most disturbing of all, this wasn't an isolated incident. Reports were filtering through German commands about other American heavy tanks appearing across the front, destroying German armor in engagements where Shermans would have been annihilated. On the same day as the Cologne Cathedral duel, March 6th, another T-26E3 was knocked out in the town of Niel near Cologne. The American tank encountered a rarely seen Nashorn tank destroyer, essentially an 88mm gun mounted on a Panzer IV chassis with minimal armor protection. At a range under 300 yards, the Nashorn's powerful gun penetrated the Pershing's frontal armor, demonstrating that German anti-tank weapons retained their lethality if they could achieve surprise and first-shot advantage. This was the only Pershing completely destroyed in combat in the European theatre during World War II, lost to a weapon that traded all protection for maximum firepower, firing from ambush at close range against an enemy that never saw the threat until too late. But isolated German successes couldn't reverse the broader trend. On March 7th, a platoon of Pershings from 9th Armoured Division played a crucial role in capturing the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the only intact Rhine crossing that Americans seized before German engineers could destroy it. The Pershings provided fire support, their 90mm guns suppressing German defenders, while American infantry stormed the bridge. One Pershing destroyed a locomotive on the far side of the Rhine, a shot at extreme range demonstrating the 90mm gun's accuracy and power. Though the Pershings themselves were too heavy to cross the damaged bridge immediately, having to wait 5 days before crossing on barges, their presence at Remagen proved critical to securing the foothold across Germany's last natural defensive barrier. Throughout mid-March, additional Pershings arrived in Europe and deployed to combat units. 40 more tanks reached the theatre in late March, distributed to 2nd Armoured Division and 5th Armoured Division. Another 30 arrived in April, going to 11th Armoured Division in Patton's 3rd Army. By war's end, 310 Pershings had been shipped to Europe, though only about 200 had actually been issued to units before hostilities ceased. The vast majority never saw combat, arriving too late to participate in fighting. But those 20 original tanks, and the handful of reinforcements that reached frontline units in time, fundamentally altered German perceptions of American armor capabilities. The Super Pershing, a unique upgunned variant designated T-26E4, arrived in Europe in mid-March and was assigned to 3rd Armoured Division. The tank mounted a T-15E 190mm gun with a longer chamber and higher muzzle velocity than the standard M3, capable of penetrating 302mm of armor at 1,000 yards with high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition. This performance exceeded even the feared 88mm Quabu K-43 gun on the Tiger II. Lieutenant Belton Cooper, 3rd Armored Division's maintenance officer, who would later write the controversial memoir Death Traps, personally supervised, adding extra armor to the Super Pershing. An 80mm frontal plate, salvaged from a destroyed Panther, was welded directly onto the mantlet. Additional spaced armor plates were welded to the hull front, creating a crude but effective defense against German anti-tank weapons. The result looked like a Frankenstein creation, festooned with additional armor, and sporting a gun barrel so long it caused maneuverability problems in confined spaces. The Super Pershing saw limited combat near Dessau in early April. On April 4th, between Weser and Nordheim, it engaged and destroyed a German tank at 1,500 yards range, possibly a Jagdpanther from 507 Heavy Panzer Battalion. On April 12th, it claimed another German tank of unknown type. On April 21st, the Super Pershing engaged a German tank at short range, destroying it with a shot to the belly as the enemy vehicle exposed its thin underside, trying to climb over rubble. The tank was described in reports as a Tiger II, though historian Stephen Zaliger later expressed skepticism, suggesting it was probably a Panzer IV. Regardless of the specific victim, the Super Pershing demonstrated that American engineers could match or exceed German gun performance when required, that the technological gap between German and American tank weapons had finally closed. For German tank crews facing the final collapse of their Reich, the appearance of American heavy tanks represented a profound psychological blow as significant as any tactical disadvantage. For years, German tankers had relied on their technical superiority to compensate for numerical inferiority and logistical collapse. A single Panther could destroy multiple Shermans if properly positioned. Tigers dominated battlefields, despite being outnumbered 10-1 or worse. German armor doctrine assumed that quality would overcome quantity, that superior weapons handled by veteran crews could defeat the endless waves of Allied tanks thrown against them. The Pershing shattered that assumption by proving that America could produce quality armor equal to German designs, while maintaining the overwhelming numerical superiority that had always been Germany's nightmare scenario. The 90mm M3 gun, while comparable to the German 88mm weapons rather than dramatically superior, represented a capability threshold that changed everything. German crews could no longer engage American armor with confident impunity from long range. The Pershing's gun could kill Panthers and Tigers at distances exceeding 1,000 yards, ranges where German crews had previously felt safe from Sherman fire. More importantly, the 90mm gun could penetrate German armor from frontal aspects under many combat conditions. Panthers struck in the turret face or gun mantlet died as quickly as Shermans. Tigers hit in the lower gun shield or turret front suffered catastrophic penetrations. The Pershing forced German crews to respect American armor for the first time, to approach engagements with the understanding that they faced genuine danger, rather than fighting a one-sided turkey shoot. German commanders adapted their tactics in response to Pershing deployments, though by March 1945, German tactical flexibility was severely limited by fuel shortages, ammunition scarcity, and the general collapse of defensive positions. Intelligence officers attempted to distribute information about the new American heavy tank, describing its appearance and capabilities to frontline units that might encounter it. Tank crews were warned not to assume that large American tanks were simply up-armored Shermans, that the new vehicles mounted genuine heavy tank guns capable of destroying any German armor. Tactical instructions emphasized the importance of first-shot advantage, achieving surprise and ambush positions where German guns could hit Pershings before American crews could return fire. But intelligence distribution in a collapsing army was haphazard at best, and many German crews encountered Pershings with no advance warning, as Bartelborth had at Cologne Cathedral. The fundamental problem for German forces was that the Pershing's arrival coincided with the final disintegration of organized resistance. By April 1945, German tank units were scattered fragments of their former strength, short on fuel, desperately low on ammunition, unable to conduct coordinated operations. Pershings faced German armour that was already defeated strategically, fighting only to delay the inevitable or defend symbolic positions. Under these conditions, evaluating the Pershing's true combat effectiveness against German tanks was nearly impossible. The Americans won, because they won everywhere, with overwhelming force crushing German resistance regardless of specific weapon performance. American tanker Bill Harris, who had experienced 3 Shermans shot out from under him during the war, later recalled the relief of finally having a tank that could fight German armour without accepting suicidal disadvantages. The Pershing wasn't perfect. Its underpowered engine meant sluggish acceleration and poor cross-country mobility compared to Sherman's. The Torquematic transmission continued causing problems. Crews complained about mechanical reliability issues typical of any new vehicle rushed into service without adequate testing, but none of those problems mattered compared to the transformative capability of a gun that could kill Panthers and Tigers, armour that could survive hits from German weapons under some circumstances, and the psychological confidence of knowing you weren't driving into combat in a tank fundamentally inferior to enemy armour. German tankers who survived the war and discussed their experiences in post-war interviews acknowledged the Pershing's effectiveness while noting that by the time it appeared, individual tank quality mattered less than overwhelming Allied superiority in every other dimension of warfare. Luftwaffe fighters had been swept from the skies, leaving German armour vulnerable to devastating close air support. American artillery outweighed German guns by factors that made movement in daylight suicidal. Fuel shortages immobilized German tanks more effectively than enemy fire. Ammunition scarcity meant German crews often entered combat with reduced basic loads, unable to sustain engagement if battles lasted longer than a few minutes. Under these conditions, whether German tanks faced Shermans or Pershings mattered less than whether they had enough fuel to reach the battlefield, enough ammunition to fight when they arrived, and any chance of surviving American artillery and airstrikes. R.P. Honeycutt, evaluating the Pershing's combat performance decades after the war, ranked the tank behind the German Panther in overall combat effectiveness, but ahead of the Tiger I, concluding that the Pershing, Panther, and Tiger I were close enough in capability that each could defeat the others under favourable circumstances. This assessment, based on analysis of firepower, mobility, and protection, suggested that the Pershing had achieved rough parity with German heavy armour, a revolutionary accomplishment for American tank design that had lagged behind German developments for years. The fact that the Pershing ranked second among the 3 tanks rather than first mattered less than the fact that America had finally fielded a heavy tank competitive with the best German designs. The broader lesson that American ordnance drew from the Pershing experience was that the long delay in deploying heavy tanks had been a catastrophic mistake. Thousands of American tankers had died in Shermans because institutional resistance and doctrinal rigidity prevented fielding vehicles capable of fighting German armour on equal terms. General Leslie McNair, whose opposition to heavy tank development had delayed the Pershing program for years, had been killed in Normandy by friendly fire from American bombers during Operation Cobra, never living to see whether his doctrinal theories about tank destroyers and light armour would prove correct. They hadn't. American tank losses in Europe were staggering, disproportionately concentrated among Sherman crews, who lacked the firepower and protection to survive encounters with German heavies. The Pershing, if it had been available in June 1944 for the Normandy invasion, might have saved thousands of lives and shortened the war by months. Production accelerated after the war ended, with over 2,000 Pershings manufactured by late 1945. But these tanks arrived too late to affect the conflict in Europe. They would find employment in Korea 5 years later, where Pershings faced Soviet-built T-34, 85 medium tanks, and proved decisively superior in firepower and protection. Against North Korean and Chinese armour, Pershings achieved kill ratios that demonstrated the tank's effectiveness when properly employed. But that vindication came years after the war for which the Pershing had been designed, against enemies different from those who had inspired its development. The legacy of German encounters with the Pershing extended far beyond the few dozen combat engagements that occurred in the war's final 2 months. For American armor development, the Pershing established design principles that would influence tank development for decades. The lineage from M26 Pershing through M46 Patton, M47, M48, and eventually M60 created a family of tanks that served as the backbone of American and NATO armored forces through the Cold War. The emphasis on heavy armor, powerful guns, and combat capability over ease of production became standard American tank design philosophy. The hard-learned lesson that reliability matters less than combat effectiveness when your tank can't fight enemy armor had been written in the blood of too many Sherman crews to ever be forgotten. For German armor doctrine, the appearance of the Pershing validated everything German designers had understood about the necessity of heavy tanks mounting powerful guns and thick armor. The Germans had been right about tank design principles. Panthers and Tigers were formidable weapons that dominated battlefields and inflicted disproportionate casualties on Allied armor. But German industry lacked the capacity to produce heavy tanks in numbers sufficient to overcome Allied numerical superiority. The genius of American armor development, demonstrated by both the Sherman and the Pershing, was recognizing that industrial capacity mattered more than individual vehicle superiority. 50,000 adequate tanks beat 5,000 excellent tanks. The Pershing proved that America could build excellent tanks too, combining quality and quantity in ways Germany never could match. The famous footage that Jim Bates filmed at Cologne Cathedral, 46 seconds of silent black and white film showing 3 90mm rounds, smashing into the Panther and crew members, desperately escaping the burning tank, became one of World War II's most iconic images. The film circulated through American training programs for years, demonstrating proper employment of the Pershing in urban combat. Tank crews studied Smoyer's technique, firing while moving to achieve surprise, then firing again from a stable platform to ensure the kill. The engagement became a textbook example of aggressive armor tactics, using firepower and shock action to destroy enemy tanks before they could effectively respond. Clarence Smoyer, the gunner who destroyed the Panther at Cologne Cathedral, survived the war and lived until September 30th, 2022, dying at age 99 as the last surviving crew member of Eagle 7. In September 2019, at age 95, he finally received the Bronze Star for his actions at Cologne, an honor delayed for 74 years, but acknowledging the significance of that brief engagement beneath the cathedral's towering spires. His commander Bob Early, loader John DeRiggi, driver William McVeigh, and radio operator Homer Davis received their Bronze Stars posthumously in the same ceremony, a recognition that came decades too late, but preserved the historical record of American tank crews who had fought in revolutionary new weapons during the war's final desperate battles. The Panther that burned in front of Cologne Cathedral smoldered for days afterward, its blackened hull becoming a landmark for American forces clearing the city. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Bartelborth's body was recovered from the wreckage, one of countless German soldiers who died defending positions that couldn't be held, fighting for a cause already lost. His sacrifice, like that of millions of other German soldiers in the war's final months, achieved nothing beyond delaying inevitable defeat by hours or days. But his hesitation in those final seconds before Eagle 7 destroyed his tank, the confusion about whether the strange American vehicle was friend or enemy, symbolized how completely the Pershing had disrupted German tactical assumptions about American armor capabilities. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, the brief combat history of the M26 Pershing had concluded. Only about 20 Pershings had seen sustained combat. Perhaps another 50 had been deployed forward but arrived too late to engage enemy armor before resistance collapsed. The remaining tanks sat in depots or were still crossing the Atlantic when the war ended. The Pershing's impact on World War II's outcome was negligible. Too few tanks arriving too late to influence strategic results. But the psychological impact on both armies was profound and lasting. American tankers who had endured years of combat in inadequate Shermans, watching friends die in burning tanks that couldn't fight German armor on equal terms, finally had a weapon that gave them confidence and capability. German tankers who had relied on technical superiority to compensate for numerical inferiority discovered that their advantage was temporary, that American industry could produce heavy tanks equal to German designs while maintaining the crushing numerical superiority that made German defeat inevitable. The brief encounters between Pershings and German armour in February and March 1945 demonstrated a truth that both sides had to acknowledge. America could build tanks as good as Germany's finest, and once that capability combined with American production capacity, German armour superiority was finished forever. Thank you for watching. For more detailed and historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.